Spanish.
English. Okay, we are live. So I'll do an English introduction and then I'll do a Spanish introduction. The purpose of today's Facebook Live is to basically talk to those business owners that small business owners who might have employees and they might have contractors, and kind of distinguishing between the difference and what are and how you should classify them and what possible penalties might be there if you don't correctly classify whether they're a W-2 employee or a 1099 employee. That's going to be something we're going to be talking about. We'll talk a little bit about intellectual property, and then probably about as far as documenting. So, para esos que están escuchando en español, el propósito de este Facebook Live es hablar sobre cómo vas a clasificar los empleados, los que son realmente empleados, y las personas que no son empleados, y que deben ser contratistas, ¿verdad? Y si los tienes clasificados de manera incorrecta, ¿cuáles pueden ser los problemas, las multas del Texas Workforce Commission, ¿verdad? O de una agencia del gobierno por no tener esas personas? Y la otra cosa que vamos a hablar, o el otro tema, sería de hablar de cómo proteger la propiedad intelectual de la empresa, ¿verdad? Y la última sería la documentación. ¿Qué documentación debes tener y cómo lo debes separar? Vamos a intentar hacer todo en español. El día de hoy tengo a Natalie Lynch, es una abogada que se dedica y nomás trabaja con empresas. Ella no trabaja con los empleados, ¿verdad? Ella no tiene clientes que son empleados. Ella tiene solamente clientes que son empresas. Ella defiende las empresas en cualquier tipo de litigio, y todo que es toda la parte laboral. Ella y su equipo se encargan de esto. Natalie, did I say that correct in Spanish? That you just you work only with employers. You do not work with the employees, and you do labor law and labor litigation. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Sí, es la verdad.
Es la verdad. Okay. Y Natalie tiene su despacho en Austin, Texas, pero tiene clientes por todo Texas. Entonces, no solamente en Austin, ella representa clientes por todo Austin. Natalie, could you just give a brief resume in English, your background experience, please?
Sure, in English. First, thank you for having me and trusting me to use my poor Spanish skills with your precious audience. I appreciate it. I do work in Austin, Texas, and most of my Spanish-speaking clients use me to practice, not the other way around. So I appreciate this. But I do work with employers. We do business, but mostly employment law. A lot of my clients are smaller, and so the business and the employment realms, they overlap, and so we do both. And I do most of the prevention work, and my associate Brian does the litigation work. But we work in all of Texas. I'm also licensed and practice in Colorado and a little bit in Wyoming. So not so much Spanish in Wyoming, but in Texas, I listen well, and I did better. My son is fluent, so the next generation is better than I am.
Okay, perfect. You said something, and I'll say it in Spanish, and maybe I might even not say correct things. You do prevention, and I think that's the key. Es prevenir los problemas, ¿verdad? Antes de tenerlos. Y yo creo que eso es importante para los empresarios, que si tienes si estás contratando gente y no sabes cómo clasificarlos, si debe ser empleado, si debe ser 1099, si debe ser W2, yo creo que aquí es donde tiene sentido que hables con Natalie, hables con un abogado laboral, especialmente, y esto es algo, Natalie, que me estaba diciendo, estábamos platicando hace 2 o 3 semanas, es la diferencia en otros países y en Estados Unidos, cómo se maneja la parte laboral y que hay muchas diferencias y lo que se permite en otros países no se permite en Estados Unidos. Entonces tenemos que tener mucho cuidado porque sí hay consecuencias para la empresa, ¿verdad? Entonces, Natalie, vamos a hablar primero entonces la diferencia entre quién es un contratista y quién es un empleado. Si quieres explicarlo un poco, cómo lo ve el gobierno o cómo lo clasifican.
You okay if I do English, or do you want me to try the Spanish first?
Whatever you feel comfortable with.
Well, I'm always more comfortable in English. The government assumes everyone is an employee. So you need to know that the government primarily assumes everyone is an employee. There is a 20-part questionnaire to determine if maybe you are a contractor. And I know that in some industry, it is very common to misapply how they do this, but it is an area that the Texas Workforce Commission in particular is really scrutinizing. Do you want to translate, or do you want me to pause?
No, I'll be happy to translate. Entonces, lo que dijo Natalie es que el gobierno automáticamente va a asumir el default, por decir, es que es un empleado. Entonces, automáticamente ellos van a tomar que si tienes a alguien en tu nómina, va a ser empleado y tú tendrías que comprobar que no es un empleado. So the burden would be on the employer to say, this is not an employee, this is a contractor, right?
Sí. I just want to speak Spanglish. Normalmente, someone who is a contractor does not take instruction from the employer. They do not get their tools from the employer. The employer cannot tell them when to work. And they normally have several other clients. Do you want to cover those points?
Sure. Entonces, sí, yes. Entonces, normalmente un contratista tiene su propio equipo, no es que el equipo viene de la empresa. También otro punto importante es que un contratista no está sujeto a ciertas horas de trabajo, que tiene que llegar a las 8, tiene que salir a las 5. Es mucho más abierto cuando pueden trabajar o cuando quieren trabajar, ¿verdad? And what was the last point, Natalie?
Normalmente tiene otros clientes,
Sí.
Muchos otros clientes.
Sí, that's right. Entonces, un contratista va a tener varios clientes, no nomás una persona o un jefe, por decir, o una empresa con la que trabaja.
Many people think it's cheaper to have a contractor, and in the moment it is cheaper for taxation reasons. However, it's very, very easy for an employee to request unemployment as a way to draw attention to the employer. And even some plaintiffs' attorneys use this as a weaponized approach to get back at bad former employers, to just apply, just to make the government go look at your records.
Okay, I don't know how I'm going to say weaponized, but I'll try my best.
What do you mean?
Entonces, lo que hacen los empleados, lo que podría suceder es que tú tienes un empleado, le estás pagando como un contratista. En el momento que ese empleado va y pide workers' compensation del gobierno, es una manera de atraer al gobierno a tu negocio, y ahí es donde se van a dar cuenta que técnicamente esta persona fue empleado y no no un contratista. Y si hay una demanda civil, ¿verdad? Entonces ahí y te quieren demandar de manera civil, es una manera que un empleado podría contratar un abogado y el abogado le va a decir, oye, vamos a usar el gobierno para que los persiguen primero antes de que yo haga mi demanda civil, porque el gobierno básicamente les va a sacar toda la información a la empresa. So what I said right now is normally I'm just hypothetical. An employee might want to sue an employer, a civil lawsuit for X reason. That attorney may say, let's get the government involved, let's get TWC, because that's where all the information is going to come out first. And then the civil litigation starts.
Sí, es la verdad. Y también la ex-employee, I'm going to stop. The former employer doesn't have to pay anything to get the TWC to look at your documents. It's totally free way to be mean to your former company.
Correct. Let me ask you something. Bueno, let me translate that. Entonces, lo que dijo Natalie es que para la persona que acabas de correr, vamos a decir, los corriste porque no estaban haciendo su trabajo, sí había una razón técnica que tú dices, oye, no estás haciendo tu trabajo, te voy a correr, pero no los tenías como empleados, los tenías como 1099. Esa persona que acabas de correr, aunque tenías una razón, ellos como quieran pueden traer al gobierno para que te investiguen y a esa persona, a ese ex empleado, no le va a costar nada para que el gobierno te investigue. Y como dijo Natalie al principio, el gobierno va a empezar primeramente pensando, esta persona es empleado, tu empresa me tienes que comprobar a mí que no fue un empleado, que sí fue contratista. So yeah, so basically there's a lot of burden on the employer to prove up that they were not a contractor. I want to talk a little bit about fines. What are we looking as far as, once they discover that they were not a 1099, they should have been a W-2 employee, how does that work with either back wages or taxes or fines? Can you go into that?
Yeah, so the inquiry invites the government to look at all of it as well as the other workers. But what they would look at is, were you properly paying someone? And that would allow them to then look at overtime issues, wage issues, other working condition issues. And so the fines look like back wages, penalties for back wages, interest on back wages. And the bigger issue is that they can look at everyone, and you are now on an audit list for 10 years.
Okay, so basically don't do it, right? So basically
only do it if it's right. And it's
Yeah.
so hard to be right.
Yeah. So lo que acaba de comentar Natalie es que no voy a comentar todos los pasos, pero yo creo que los más importantes es, primera vez, el gobierno investiga esa persona, pero ya que están investigando al empresario o la empresa, abre la puerta para ahora ver todos los otros empleados cómo le estás pagando, ¿verdad? Sí. ¿Le estás pagando como contratista o le estás pagando como W-2? Y ahí es donde va a haber el problema de que si se dan cuenta que no lo estabas clasificando de manera correcta, entonces va a haber, vas a tener que pagar impuestos del pasado, va a haber multas y también arriba de eso va a haber un interés.
The audit. The audit.
Y sí, te van a, wow, I forgot that word in Spanish. Auditear. Anyway.
Una inspección para los 10 años.
Sí, vas a estar bajo, como dicen, bajo el lente del gobierno por 10 años, viendo quién estás contratando, cómo le estás pagando, si lo estás haciendo de manera correcta. Yo creo que
Auditoria.
sí, auditoria. Qué bueno que ella lo buscó, Natalie. Thank you. Eh, yo creo que, so why do employers do it? Why would you go, why would they take this risk? Because A, they don't know, or because initially it's just they gamble, the pay is less. What's the thought behind this?
I think that people get bad advice from their friends. I think that it didn't used to be as regulated as it is today. And so bad advice from 20 years ago is very bad advice today. And it is cheaper in the moment if you don't get caught. That's why.
Okay. And obviously they're betting that
Yes.
the probabilities the probabilities of me getting caught are small, so I'm going to take that chance, right?
Or they don't even understand that it's a gamble.
Yeah. And it's a gamble that really is not worth it.
It's so much cheaper to hire an attorney. That's how much cheaper it is to just do it right in the beginning.
Okay, so I've got so many questions. So let's go back to that. So I've got clients that have investor visas. They come to the US, they start a brand new company. They start hiring people. They have a business plan. Is there any courses they should take? Is there anything they could do? Obviously, I would suggest to them, speak to Natalie, get an employer handbook. Probably that's kind of like the foundation. And there's probably other things. Could you talk about it? What would you suggest to somebody like an investor coming to the US for the first time that's opening up a business and they want to hire some people?
So do you want to translate, or you want me to try to do that so people are caught up?
Ya, lo voy a traducir. La pregunta que le hice a Natalie es, oye, porque yo tengo empresarios que vienen a los Estados Unidos, abren negocios, nunca han contratado a gente en los Estados Unidos y obviamente las leyes laborales son muy diferentes aquí. ¿Cuál es el primer paso que ese inversionista tendría que hacer antes o durante que esté contratando a gente para trabajar en su empresa nueva? ¿Qué es lo que le estoy preguntando, Natalie? ¿Cuál es su sugerencia, verdad? Si hay algún curso que pueden tomar, que hablen con Natalie para hacer un libro, ¿cuál es el proceso?
Primero, introduce your immigration attorney to your labor attorney so that your labor attorney understands the unique aspects of the visa that you are on and the qualifications for the business that your labor attorney needs to be aware of. As an example, I recently worked with an Israeli organization, and they did not listen to me. And they hired a bunch of other Israelis who were not citizens, and that was inconsistent with their requirements for their company visa type. So that's a first thing for this category of people.
Let me translate. Entonces, lo primero que dijo Natalie es que asegurarse que estás presentando el abogado laboral con el abogado migratorio para que platiquen de cuáles son las visas, quién califique para esas visas, para que el abogado laboral entienda cuál es el proceso, el sistema, cómo esta empresa va a poder contratar gente.
Then we need to make sure that we are documenting the rules of hiring, so an employment contract, and our understanding with people around intellectual property, around how we can fire them, what our expectations are for behavior, and really any other rules of the workplace. And there are always things, but please also allow your attorney to help you understand how to store your documents and how long to store those documents.
Ok. Entonces lo que Nara le dijo es las reglas, ¿verdad? ¿Cuáles son las reglas de ese trabajo? ¿Qué es lo que las personas pueden hacer, no pueden hacer? Establecer esas por escrito. Que el empleado tenga, que sepa las expectaciones de su trabajo, de la empresa, cuáles son las expectativas de ese puesto. Bajo qué circunstancias la empresa los podría correr, ¿verdad? A ese empleado, que ellos sepan desde el principio, si haces esto, te voy a correr, ¿verdad? Si haces esto, te voy a correr. Si haces esto, vamos a platicarlo para estar seguro que esté bien. Y obviamente tienes que documentar todo, tener todo esto escrito. Y la última parte, the last part you said was how to store them. Entonces, hay cierta manera de guardar esta documentación. Can you talk about that? I think that's the next part of how should the employer save these documents?
At the most basic level, separate your medical documents, your normal employment documents, and totally separate your I-9 documents from everything else. There's a big game with government audits around going and requesting I-9 documents and using that as a gateway to look at everything else in the paper or electronic file. But if we have properly stored our I-9s and gotten rid of the old ones so 3 years after somebody quits, we get rid of them. But if there are really old, bad ones that were done wrong, but they're in the same file, the government can use that as an excuse to look at more things. So keeping, especially with manual labor contracts or manual labor work, to have the I-9 separated, but then also any medical documents also completely separated.
When you say medical, are you speaking about like their medical insurance or what? Or
medical insurance, any requests for accommodation, or any workers' comp or injury related issues.
Ok, thank you. Entonces, básicamente hay tres partes donde la empresa, vamos a decir tres cajones donde debes guardar la documentación. La primera es cualquier cosa con médico, es el seguro. Si te pidieron una acomodación, alguna circunstancia que la persona no puede trabajar sentados, parados, y tuviste que comprar una silla especial para ellos, eso sería un ejemplo. Si estuvieron lastimados en el trabajo, hubo un seguro. Entonces, todo eso es una parte. La segunda parte es standard, lo que es cierta documentación normal por el trabajo. I guess like their application, right? When they applied for the work and there was an application filled out, that's separate from the medical. Y la última, because I know about I-9, I've been through I-9 audits with some of my employers, el documento famoso, el I-9, que ese documento es que cada persona que es empleado tiene que firmar. Es un documento que pregunta si eres ciudadano americano, si eres residente permanente o qué visa tienes para trabajar aquí, ¿verdad? So yes, really quick, I had a client maybe 4 or 5 years ago. They went through an I-9 audit from DHS. They were fine. Everybody was 130 or 40 employees. They were all U.S. citizens except for 1 or 2. But in each I-9, there was an error. And for each I-9, I think it was like $800 or $900. I think the fine came out to like $180,000. So there were U.S. citizens, but there was errors in that document. Entonces, déjame hablar de eso. Natalie, do you do I-9 audits, inspections?
I've only done a few. I'm no expert. I've done enough to know I never want to do it again.
Okay.
So bad.
Sí, le estaba comentando a Natalie en inglés que en mi despacho hemos hecho I-9 auditorías, que es un documento que tienes que llenar y tener para cada empleado. Not a contractor, right? Not a 1099. You don't do a 99, 1099, but on a W-2 employee, ¿sí? So, cada empleado tienes que ser, y ese es el documento famoso que dice si eres ciudadano, si eres residente, si tienes visa de trabajo y puedes escoger cómo te enseñaron la documentación. En el caso que yo tuve, fue una empresa con 125 empleados, todos eran ciudadanos americanos, yo creo que menos uno, pero cada documento lo llenaron y equivocadamente le faltaba cierta información y no me acuerdo cómo que la multa salió cerca de 180,000, $190,000, no me acuerdo si era 8, no sé, era una cantidad, pero me acuerdo que era $180,000. Lo pudimos negociar con el gobierno y yo creo que al fin pagaron como $100,000 de multa. So I was able to negotiate it, and we brought it down to like 100,000, from 180 to 100,000. Let's talk about something else that we talked about before, and I think we already talked about the I-9s. And can you talk a little bit about I-9s and keeping them for more than 3 years? What happens?
Don't do it. So it's 3 years after the employee is terminated, which means you have to go back and look at your files and say, who was this guy? Oh, he's been gone. Get rid of it. So 3 years after termination, but you should occasionally audit your own I-9 files to make sure that they're correct, because there are some things you are allowed to correct. And there's other things that you have to start over if there's a mistake on it, and the fines attached for those things too. So they should be destroyed 3 years after the employee leaves, which I realize is administratively very difficult to manage.
Yeah, and I think a little bit about that is also the industries. DHS kind of targets certain industries like the restaurant industry, the construction industry, industries where there's high turnover rate in persons.
And high immigration participation.
Yeah, high immigration. Entonces, sí, la regla sobre la I-9 es después de que la persona que ya no está como empleado, a los 3 años después de que ya no son empleados, es cuando podrías ya no tener que darte con esa documentación. Si te quedas con esa documentación y es una persona que se fue de tu empresa hace 5 años, Inmigración o Department of Homeland Security, DHS, ellos como quiera te pueden multar sobre esa documentación, aunque esa persona ya salió de tu empresa hace 5, 6, 8 años. El hecho de tenerlo ahí y que ellos están viendo que estaba llenado y equivocado, te van a multar. Entonces tienen que tener mucho cuidado. Hablen con su contador. I think a lot of accountants do I-9 audits. Algunos abogados inmigratorios también hacen I-9 audits. Entonces, si tienes una empresa, no estás seguro qué hacer ahí y quieres alguien que entre para que revise que todo esté bien, es prevenir, ¿verdad? Para prevenir una multa. What other things did we want to talk about, Natalie? What other thing do you think needs to be mentioned, especially to small business owners?
One quick point. Many specialized human resource people or consultants can also help you with your I-9 paperwork.
Yes.
That's a much more affordable way to ensure that your I-9s are right. The other thing that I think we need to tell any small business owner is that right now and under this administration, harassment in Texas is a very, very big deal. let me say that, and there's one law I want to introduce super quickly that's so important and scary. So there is a sexual harassment law in Texas that applies to the personal assets of the business owner and everyone in management, include the management's personal assets related to sexual harassment in Texas. So if you hear anything about sexual harassment in Texas, you need to take it seriously. You need to look into it. Your only obligation is to investigate it and do the right thing. That's your only obligation, but it can affect the personal assets of business owners, and it's scary.
Entonces, en español sería acoso, I translated it just to acoso sexual en un trabajo, en un negocio, ¿verdad? Que podría suceder. Ahorita lo están investigando y acaba de cambiar la ley. Natalie, the law changed, so we got, it's easier to audit for that, I guess. Is that basically it?
The new issue is that it comes in with one employee. So I'll make the joke that an owner could sexually harass himself and be obligated by this law, but one person, and it affects your personal assets, not the company assets.
Wow, that is big. So even if you have an LLC, even if you did everything correct to separate your liability, okay, that's very important. Entonces, aquí con la ley nueva es que tú eres el empresario, eres dueño de la empresa, es una LLC, es una Inc., pero si en el trabajo, en tu negocio, hay acoso sexual, y no de que tú el dueño lo hiciste, pero de un empleado a otro empleado, y no lo investigaste, no I'm trying to say, you didn't address it, no lo, they didn't, I'm sorry?
Remedy.
Ya, no lo arreglaste, la demanda podría ser contra el dueño de la empresa, pero contra sus bienes personales. So it's two employees, there's an issue there, right? There's sexual, I don't know why it does that. Okay. There's sexual harassment there. If you as the owner don't take care of it, don't remedy it, then if there's a suit, that suit can go against the owner of the company, against his personal assets. Is that right?
It's inconceivable, but you're right. You've got it right.
Okay. So how does an employer who has 50, 60, 70, 100 employees or 200 employees, he owns a company, how do they protect themselves? What do they do? What steps should they be taking internally with their HR manager, with their management team? What do you suggest?
You need to have a culture of reporting that includes your management. Your management needs to understand that these consequences affect their personal assets too now, for managers and supervisors, but you need a culture of reporting. You need a contract with your employees to require them to report. You can't pass the obligation to fix it to your employees, but you can pass an obligation to report it to your employees.
Entonces, eso es importante lo que dijo Natalie. Tener esa cultura de que si algo está fallando en el negocio, como acoso sexual, que si esto está sucediendo, que lo reporten a los gerentes, ¿verdad? O a la gerencia, y que la gerencia lo vaya a reportar con el dueño de la empresa. Y también tener un contrato con el empleado que dice, si sufres de esto o si lo ves o si está sucediendo, nos tienes que decir, ¿verdad? Para poder arreglar la situación. How old is this law?
2 sessions, so 5 years.
5 years ago?
5 años, sí.
Wow, entonces esto pasó hace 5 años.
Sí, okay. The first cases are only just now being litigated.
Okay, perfect. It's 12:21. We try to keep these short, sweet, simple, straight to the point, and hopefully our those that were listening and watching this got some great value out of it. Any last words, Natalie, before we say happy weekend to everybody?
No, just thank you for putting up with my language skills. I hope I was helpful in some way, and I'm so honored you asked me, Alfredo.
It's my pleasure. Ever since I worked with you, I was like, okay, I need to hear her on a Facebook Live. I want my clients to hear her, all my business clients, because you're so knowledgeable in this stuff, and it's just so much information.
It is.
And it's I with my clients, what they come from other countries, they start businesses here, they're doing everything right, and obviously they just don't understand the law. And to have something bad happen to them just because they don't understand the way we work here, just because they didn't speak to an employment attorney from the beginning, that doesn't need to happen, right? So yes, si ustedes tienen preguntas, dudas, y tienes empleados, vas a empezar a trabajar aquí en Estados Unidos, cómo es el proceso correcto de entrevistar, cómo entrevistar a una persona para no meterte en problemas, ¿verdad? Just how to interview somebody so you don't break the law, para que no vayas a hacer cosas contra la ley. Le pueden hablar a Natalie Lynch. Natalie, do you have a phone number or website that they should visit?
So it's Lynch, LYNCHLF.com.
Okay. And is there a good telephone number that they should call you if they want to speak to you?
512-298-2346.
I'm going to repeat it. 512-298. What were the last four?
2346.
2346. Natalie, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Y a todos que tengan muy buen fin de semana. Gracias. Adiós.
See you, Alfredo. Bye.
Bye-bye.